Good morning, everybody. Craig DeLeo here, and this is part of my constitutional discussion. And I'm going to do Article 1, but I'm not going to read it verbatim because Article 1 of the Constitution is actually 10 sections long. And I also want to point out that Article 1 versus Article 2 is extremely lengthy and I actually encourage everybody to go find Article 1 and read it, because Section 1 is, I'm actually going to read it. All legislative power herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States of America, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Now, the one thing I always love to point out is that the Founding Fathers found it necessary to discuss Congress first. And it vested all the legislative power, the power to make the laws, in Congress. But it did then find it necessary to spend 10 sections discussing their separation of powers between the House and the Senate, and putting in all these guardrails for the House and the Senate of what they are and are not allowed to do. It talks about, you get to have a Navy, but you can have an Army, but you have to renew it every 2 years. It talks about how you have to be, it talks about the ages, how you have to be, be at least 25 years of age to be a rep. You have to be, it's 25, and you have to be, I don't know where did it say? Yep, 25, and you have to be a U.S. citizen for at least 7 years, and it's different for senator, and it talks about all these guardrails for Congress, and all of the, our ability to levy taxes, how we're, you're supposed to be able to get compensation, and it talks about all these things. And I highly encourage you to read it yourself. But one of the things it talks about how the VP is in charge of the Senate, which I think is supposed to create the liaison between the executive branch. I always felt was a way you create the liaison between the executive branch and the legislative branches. The president's not supposed to make laws. He's supposed to be running the country, because Article 2 is all about the executive powers and the executive branch, but that's only 4 sections. The section on the president is about this long, while the section on the House and the Senate is about this long. So I guess I'm also going to talk about Article 2 while I'm talking about this, because I think it's interesting, the fact of they set a lot of guardrails in place for the House, but very few for the president. And it wasn't necessarily because they wanted the president to have more powers. It was because they expected most of the power to sit with Congress, not with the president. The president's day-to-day, from the way I've always read this, was supposed to have massive amounts of power, but their job, because I still have a hope that one of these days we are going to have someone who's not a bio male. Why we're one of the leading powers in the world, and we've stuck with bio males for our president, I don't know. But the fact of their job was supposed to be running the country, not legislating the country. And it says that very obviously in literally the second word, the executive power shall. And it says the legislative power shall, the legislative powers herein. So the president's not supposed to be worried about laws. And as Mr. Clyde said in his 100-day email about Mr. Trump, the executive actions are supposed to be about helping you adjust the direction of the country, not necessarily trying to adjust the law. And this is my point, is the fact of that's where these things are supposed to be, is the fact of Congress is supposed to be focusing on making the laws, not trying to run the country. And I think that's where I personally think we've gone off the rails recently because, the president and Congress keep bickering with each other. And I think that's where we're having problems right now is they're both trying to get in each other's way. I think that a discussion of term limits of Congress, if we're going to put term limits on the president, we need to put term limits on Congress because they each need to focus on their lane. I hate to say it that way because we all keep interfering with each other. Because Congress is supposed to be worried about passing laws. The president is supposed to be worried about running the day to day. And I think that's clearly shown here when you read those two sections. And I don't know how better to explain it than that. And they're both very lengthy to understand that. And I think that's the problem, and the Congress is supposed to set up the guide rails. The reason why the Constitution is so lengthy in Article 1 is this document sets up the guide rails from us, the people, for Congress, while Congress is then supposed to put the guide rails on the president and the judicial branch. And that's how we control this. We control, and I think this is also where part of our problem lies with our people in the House and the Senate right now, is they're not listening to us. They're supposed to hear us every day. They're supposed to listen to us every day. And that's how this control works. They serve us. They then keep the guide rails on the president and the judicial branch. And that's why this section is so lengthy on Congress, is a fact of it's supposed to trickle down. We control them, the people. We execute our guide rails on them. This document helps us control those guide rails, and then they continue to control the guide rails on the president and the judicial branch. And I think that's one of the ways where we're failing, is the fact of these guide rails are not being executed effectively because everybody's trying to get in each other's path. And one of the other things I think that is missed when you read this document is the fact of they say many times that, they're only supposed to meet, at least once a year. The amount of time that they're spending in DC is supposed to be very little because the amount of power that these guys were supposed to get was very little. A lot more authority was supposed to be put on the individual states so that they could control themselves. We're supposed to be a lot more anonymity, self-execution of each state. Each state was supposed to have its own authority, and we weren't. And as I was saying, when I was traveling, good Lord, 2 years ago now, when I was in Peru, was the fact of we're not supposed to be one massive country. We're supposed to be a country of 50 countries. And that's more the way we should look at it. We're not a country of one constitution. We're a country of 51 constitutions. Each state is supposed to almost run independently of each other. And the only time we are supposed to, need the federal government to intercede is when we're not getting along or there's some sort of dispute between states. And as you'll see when it comes to Amendment 2, when it comes to a well-regulated militia, a standing army was not supposed to be needed because we were all supposed to have these standing militias. The National Guard, which must become the National Guard, which, I'll discuss later on. But this is the problem, is I think that we're not focused, everyone, as stupid as it sounds, and I hated this phrase when I was active duty, everybody needs to stay in their lane. And I think that's one of the things we've gotten out of, is the fact of, the president is everywhere trying to create laws and everything else, and Congress is not focusing on making laws and interfering with, the execution of the government, while they need to be focusing on legislation, and the judicial branch needs to be focused on adjudicating. And when I say the judicial branch, I mean from the ground up, or from top down, from the Supreme Court all the way down to the individual courts. So that's kind of my spiel on, actually it's Article 1, 2, and 3, but I'm actually going to touch a little bit more probably on all three as I go through all three, because they do have their individual things. And this is where I really want you guys to comment, and I'll clarify as best as I can as I go through, because I'm trying to keep these videos under or right around 10 minutes each. So please input. Let's discuss. I really want to hear your comments, because I'm glad to sit down with this, because this is something I'm passionate about. I've always had one of these for a long time, and I've read this way too many times, just like I've read more than a few documents repeatedly because I believe in them. So thank you all. I love all my shipmates. I love you all, and have a super day.